Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director at League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Now, we have a very special couple of episodes for you here because this one is a two-parter. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of talking to Tarn and Zach Adams of Bay 12 Games, creators of Dwarf Fortress. So I figured 21, 23 years of game development probably warranted a 2.5 hours worth of conversation. So we split it into two parts. This is episode 1. And we cover a whole lot of stuff. It's probably the biggest chat that we've had that covers like 2 decades of development on one game. But we actually dive right into the start like we do on the Game Maker's Notebook. And we talk about how they grew up making games. The first games, those first games that were like the sort of precursors to Dwarf Fortress that they were making as young adults, their early attempts to commercialize in the shareware market. We even then move on to things like the salient points, those big features in Dwarf Fortress that moved the needle for them, when it became a cultural mainstay, when the community brushfires and all those stories kicked off, and we talk about some of their favorite ones as well. And then later in the podcast, we actually talk about their relationship with Tanya Short and Kitfox Games and how they found themselves on the Steam platform. We talk about the negotiations, the structure of that deal. It's a very open conversation about the logistics of even taking 20 years of, I would say, solo development, but there was 2 of them, the indie developers like making this game for 20 years on their own, and then working with another team, onboarding folks, or working with another team to get that onto Steam. And then, of course, the success that they've had there. If you care about games at all, well, I guess that's why you're listening to this podcast. But if you work in the industry, if you have any interest in our medium, I would highly suggest you listen to these conversations. Dwarf Fortress is such a monumental, singular entry into our medium. It has had such a cultural impact and influence on everything that we make, almost, in video games. They're just such lovely, genuine, humble gentlemen that I can't wait for you all to listen to this. So please enjoy part 1, and I'll see you again for part 2.
I'm Tarn Adams, and I've been making Dwarf Fortress with my brother Zach for the past 20 years. Dwarf Fortress is a settlement management game. You'll have to make sure your dwarves have enough alcohol to drink and mushrooms to eat. But first, a new world and centuries of history will be generated for you to build upon. A story will arise as you play because your mind is a story-building engine, and Dwarf Fortress is designed to help you weave tales. Fortresses tend to collapse. Flooding, lava, beasts, starvation, madness. Dwarves aren't as resilient as you might think. But it's okay because losing is fun, and now we've got graphics.
This is our life's work, and we're never going to stop.
Hope you enjoy the game. Good luck.
Tarn, Zach, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Likewise, yeah.
Amazing. Where are you joining me from? Where are you two based?
So we're out in Kitsap County, west of Seattle, across the water.
Oh wow, amazing!
Yeah, just took a ferry into Seattle yesterday with someone who was also interviewing us, and that was nice to visit the city. So it's kind of a mix of being out in the woods and also being right next to Seattle.
Yeah, have you always been Washington State boys?
About half our lives now. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, we were born here, but then we moved around the country, and then now we're back.
the allure of Mount Rainier brought you back. So
yeah. Well, this is the best place to live, really.
It's such a beautiful state, and Seattle as well, just surrounded by mountains and if you can deal with the rain coming through as often as it does, but yeah, it's usually about around August, September, because you've got, PAX West out there. And now we went up there for the GDC advisory board meeting last year. It's such a beautiful spot. We're out at Salish, which is like where Twin Peaks was filmed. That's the hotel from Twin Peaks. It was a really cool, like, little nerd moment I got, but it's over these beautiful falls. It's just such beautiful nature out there. So usually on this podcast, we start it with how'd you get into games and everything like that. But I'm going to get there first of all, what I would love is, you two are obviously the creators of Dwarf Fortress. And Dwarf Fortress, I think for some, like, if they don't know who you are or they don't know more about it, it's this, for decades now, it's kind of been this legendary game that stories have been told, or people have seen like great almost mosaics or images drawn of the escapades that happen to people's dwarf fortresses. But I think there is probably a population of people out there that know of it, know of its legacy, understand that it's quite important perhaps to our medium, and that it's some kind of grand achievement, which we're obviously going to talk about today. But would you be able to actually explain to us and to our listeners who may not be intimately familiar what Dwarf Fortress actually is?
Yeah, Dwarf Fortress is and just a sec here. Am I flatlined?
I think you're good.
Because I see Trent's waveform, and I don't see a waveform on mine. I guess that's fine though.
Josh, you're all good. Yeah, it's a weird Zencaster thing.
All right then. All right, so I'll just get back into it then. Yeah. So Dwarf Fortress is a settlement management game where you have a colony of dwarves. You start out with 7 of them, of course, and dig into the side of the mountain to try and make your fortune, and always run into a little bit of trouble along the way. But the real point of the game is that it's a gigantic sprawling simulation. And what we were aiming to do, and still aim to get to, is to make a fantasy world simulator, to have an entire world that's spun up, makes the map, and then runs through hundreds of years of history. And there's tens of thousands of people that have lived, maybe even 1 million things that have happened that it can list in a chronology for you. And all of that exists and is ongoing the second that you're like, come into the game and plop your first little dwarf caravan down at the side of a mountain. All of that history is sitting there. And then you just become a part of the world.
Right. The history is going on. I mean, it goes through the like hundreds of years before you start, and it continues on as you're playing the game, all these thousands of characters.
Yep.
Beyond your sight. And that's one of the biggest problems with Dwarf Fortress is that all this stuff is going on and you just don't see it.
No
but it's
idea.
there.
Yeah. Amazing. And I think another interesting point about the game that really I think catches a lot of people's eye specifically is that, until this year or late last year, it was all ASCII art as well, right? So maybe, Zach, could you explain what ASCII art is for folks who maybe aren't aware?
So the very first computer games were displayed in ASCII, and ASCII is basically the English alphabet plus a bunch of symbols, and that's all the computer could actually print on the screen. And so, as kind of an art project, or just because there was the easiest way to develop the game and all its features without having to worry about drawing pixel art and that kind of stuff, we just used ASCII art as kind of the matrix. You look at it, you see all these crazy symbols, and then you visualize in your mind, oh, okay, a D is a dragon, a G is a goat, but a G is also a goblin. So if you can solve that problem in your mind and keep on going, then, but it limited the amount of people that could get into it, but the stories that they had spread through the internet and helped us out. I mean, that's the other thing with Bay 12 and Dwarf Fortress is that for almost 20 years, it existed only as what would you call it? Is only with the contributions of the
donationware, I guess you'd call it, something like that.
Amazing. Yeah. All right. Well, these are all topics that I want to dive deep into, but let's take it all the way back to the start. When the two of you are younger, what's your earliest memories of video games? Because obviously they've had a major influence over you, and even I imagine some that aren't video games, perhaps Dungeons and Dragons or whatever it is. What's the earliest memory you have of it sparking a fire inside your brains?
Okay, so we started very, very young with computers. It's like, I remember my first memories of the computers comes when I was about 5 years old, and my dad was teaching me how to program. And it's like, and Tarn was even younger. I mean, he's like 2.5 years younger than me, and started at the same time. And I mean, there's stuff like Byte magazine out of that time that had like computer code written on the back of it that you could program into a computer and play a game. And just games like that, which were just in ASCII.
Yeah.
Like NetHack was not. I mean, there was no net, so just hack.
Yeah.
There's NetHack that's out there now as a role playing game in ASCII, and then
Yeah.
that was the kind of games that were out there. Even that is too complicated. They were like I don't know. They're kind of like Battleship would be one, like a game. It wasn't Battleship, but it's like,
a similar
picks the
sort
coordinates.
of structure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like guess where the enemy is. And,
Yeah, it was like Star Trek, right?
Yeah, it's like
that.
Star Trek kind of. And it's just those were the only type of games that the computer could show. Also, that it could handle. I mean, these computers were pretty simple.
Do you remember what that computer was, or in the early days that you were programming on?
I believe it was a TRS-80, a Trash 80.
And was this an activity that you would do with your dad? Did he kind of just teach you and set you off, or would you sort of code games together? Or
it was he would show us, he would program in those games. We would like the beginnings of the the proto internet where we would download games from these bulletin board systems that were like run out of universities and stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he would download those for us. And
I remember sitting in a chair. I must have been like 5 years old or something. And he showed me what a for loop looked like, right? Like for I equals 0, I less than 10. And then it was something like, I don't remember basic that well anymore. It's been so long. It was like step 1 or something you said to make it move one at a time. And then you have like a locate statement, and then you can print a thing. And I remember it moving across the screen, like the thing as the number increased, then the X coordinate would increase and it moved across the screen. But I also remember him, once he showed me that, he kind of stepped back and drew away and just let me mess with it, change the numbers, and I could see it, moving in random spots and doing random things. So it's like he would be there in the beginning to help us, and he'd be there like if we had some kind of bug and the thing didn't compile or work. But he also let us get just kind of off on our own with it, including with those bulletin board games. You download them, or the ones that you type in. Like once you type them in or download, it's just source code that you then run. So it's just sitting there, and you can also just mess with that.
So one of the earliest ones that we really became to understand was the Temple of Loth, which was a role playing game that you could download. And it had the source code because it was written in BASIC, and we just messed with that game all the time, just changed all the creatures and stuff like that.
Amazing. Made the goblins and the goats both G. You're like, there's something's not right here. They both got to be G.
Just run out of. Go ahead.
So you've so these are your early days. When did it sort of go from tinkering into some sort of serious hobbyist stuff? Were you doing things? Did you know, because you started so young? I mean, that's a hell of 5 and 2.5 is a hell of a head start on programming. Did you know from a very young age, going into like primary school, or well, in Australia it's primary school, but like into school and then high school? Did you know that programming was something that you wanted to do? Were you seriously trying to make your own games then, or did that come a little bit later?
No, since the beginning, we were making our own.
It was not an occupation, though, but it wasn't really a hobby either, right? It was like we did it when we learned how to read, when we learned how to do like multiplication tables and stuff. So it was just a thing. Like, don't all the kids just sit there for 8 hours a day writing video games? and we came in pretty early. We started writing our own stuff. I don't know when we started. Like Zach started writing a bunch of kind of Sierra style like adventure games with text graphics.
Like choose your own adventure, or it was more than choose your own adventure, but because it had all variables and stuff in it. But it was kind of like back then they had like The Hobbit was one of these games that
was made in Melbourne. It's
And so the games I would make were kind of based on that. They're like, you enter the room, and then the dwarf enters the room, and then talk to dwarf, that kind of stuff.
I love the notion of going to school, learning how to write after programming, and it's like, okay, we can use that for our programming now. Text adventures have just been unlocked. Amazing.
It was so weird, like going into school, and then I remember being pulled aside in 6th grade for the kids that were going to go into algebra, and like the guy there were three of us or something just staring up at him, and he was like, okay, now this is going to be hard, but I'm going to write this thing. It's like X equals 2. And he's like, a variable is a bucket. And I'm just
You like take the chalk? You're like, I'll take it from here, pal.
It's just the strangest thing. I couldn't even understand what was going on. I thought I'd just gone into a complete alternate universe or whatever.
And so, like you just said, obviously it wasn't a job at that stage. Coming out of high school, did you two go to college? Did you study computer science, or were you sort of beyond that, or what did you do for work whilst you have this like hobby on the side that's consuming all your time and attention, I guess?
Well, I mean, even in high school, what was it? One of the games that we bought or that we got was shareware. It had come with a price that you could just use it, but then you could write up a check and send it in the mail. And so when we were in high school, we actually tried that. So it's like a job.
Oh,
like
making your own shareware.
We tried to make a game, and we knew, and like our games were actually better than like a lot of the games that were for sale.
Especially shareware,
especially the shareware. So we're like, oh no, maybe we can make money off of this. But that's the whole story, right? That did not work. Yeah. And of course, and I mean, the story of Dwarf Fortress is about how it came to the internet around the same time that it's actually possible to do this donationware or whatever you want to call it. That's we were right at the beginning of that when it was possible, and that helped or that was a good chance for our success there.
Yeah, I mean, people were scrapping with like putting games and like diskettes in baggies and taking them to Egghead Software and selling them. And then people would set up their own like kind of Stripe type accounts and print out paper manuals and send them and stuff. And it was just a very few people could make it that way. Yeah. And we weren't one of them at that time. But the invention of like the PayPal button, that's what made us able to keep it going later on.
Amazing. So what, like, before, were there any sort of major projects that you had, I guess, before Dwarf Fortress? Like, I know you guys were working on like there was something earlier on just before Dwarf Fortress, right? That it morph into Dwarf Fortress, or
so the kind of timeline there is like even back in elementary school, we made a game called Drag Slay because you're limited to 8 letters, right? 8 letters, right? 8 letters, and it was a basic game, and we actually we actually have that and got it running on DOSBox. And so that's still around. And
amazing. Really incredible.
Yeah. No, we should throw that out there sometime. But it's that was a very simple game though, and it was really kind of heavily D&D inspired. I'm not sure if we weren't probably playing. It was right around the age we got our first D&D book. So when I say something's D&D inspired, it's probably just games that were inspired by D&D that then inspired us. Right? We just knew what a hit point was, basically. And then, but then we also got into like Cyberpunk, the tabletop RPG, Cyberpunk 2020, one of them back then. And,
based in Washington, right? Based in Seattle, isn't it? Cyberpunk? Am I
correct? I know. Mike Pondsmith lives here. He was. I mean, I don't know if he's still at DigiPen. I mean, it feels like a California game, though, right? It's so wonderful. Yeah, so we got into that, and that was one of the first experiences we had with a game that didn't have hit points. It was like body part damage, right? There's the Friday Night Firefight supplement part that comes with it's in the main box, but just goes through all, how you might handle a system like that. And as kids, we're just fascinated by that. And so our next iteration of Drag Slay, after I learned how to do C when I was like 13, 14, we started doing body part damage. And we're just going to start hacking off arms. People are going to be thrown up everywhere, bleeding. There goes your eyeball, just all that kind of stuff. Threw that all in there because, I mean, computers can handle that stuff really well. Yeah. And
what else are teenage boys going to do with a computer? Teach them how to program, right?
So this is how it's really a straight line from that to Dwarf Fortress. And the thing with the body parts is that the game was named the game right before Dwarf Fortress is Sprawling Sprawling is the wrong word because it's actually we'll get to that. But this complex game that came right before Dwarf Fortress was named after the body part damage in Drag Slay, which was in Drag Slay there was a variable that said how many arms you had that still worked, and it was called arm okay equals 2. Right. And so this next game we had was called Slaves to Armok, arm okay. Slaves to Armok, God of Blood.
I love it. That's beautiful.
And so that I mean, we could talk about like how that.
Yeah, tell us about Slaves to Armok.
Yeah, that was the first major project. I mean, not the first major project. That was the major project before Dwarf Fortress. It had kind of 2 iterations. We started the one that came right before it was we had it was kind of pixel graphics and isometric, and we made these frames out of like by rotating like your forelimbs and your upper arms and your head and your body, and we drew just pixel graphics for all those things, and then had a frame editor so we could kind of make these keyframes. It wasn't really keyframes because we didn't interpolate it all, but it was
this is kind of like how Spore worked, right?
Yeah,
the creature creator from Spore. It's like you created the body, and then the computer kind of found out how it walked. And
I mean, this is kind of in between these 2 versions. Yeah, I mean, that was the second version, and the first pixel one was just like a slaughter fest. You just walked around hacking people's limbs off and stuff, and then we kind of moved. We were like, okay, but this system's so cumbersome, right? Where you're making these drawing the pixel things. So we're like 3D graphics, wave of the future, but this was 2000, so we're already way behind. But We figured out how to use OpenGL or whatever existed at that time. I don't remember if it was DirectX OpenGL or the one we picked up ourselves, because I did like do UV texture coordinates like manually for a little while on when you used to draw your own triangles before we had any libraries. But I think this was after something like OpenGL or DirectX. I think it was DirectX maybe, but I could be wrong. But anyway, this 3D game, we decided we were going to make an RPG in 3D. Games like Daggerfall had been out like 4 years before and stuff. We're like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do it this way. If we're going to be able to actually, compete's the wrong word because we weren't really selling it or anything, but we had a web page. Like in 2000, we put up a web page to let people play this game as we were making it.
Yeah. And at that time, were you sort of Bay 12 Games? Were you going under this name and everything?
Yeah, we had the Bay. It was bay12games.com. That was the website. Put it up in December 2000.
It still exists, by the way.
Same, and it looks about the same too. Or even worse, really. I think it looks worse than we did before because someone designed the original one and they used like this kind of negative image of the International Space Station or something like that, and that was kind of the image on the web page. It looked kind of cool. And then at some point, we just decided to redo the graphics, but then it was just me trying like. Oh gosh!
If you leave
it's worse than MySpace.
If you leave it the same for long enough, basically this aesthetic style will just come around in a loop, and at some point you'll be on trend again. I think which will probably be soon, to be honest.
It's about time. But but then we glowed up the game, so we jumped out of the cycle. But now it's that Slaves to Armok, though, that was a RPG built from the bottom up. We had very bad design philosophy back then, where we knew that like our drag slay game, the C one, was very complicated. It was actually really fun game. We have these kind of procedural maps and run around just in this kind of just fighting things basically. But the damage system was so interesting. And you had these kind of party with you and so forth that you could hire and go to cities and so forth. It was just kind of like, I don't know if it was like a Kenshi experience or something like that, but like it was kind of just this really entertaining game. And then, but it sort of collapsed under its own weight because I was still learning how to structure things, and make them future proof. And so when
you say collapsed under its own weight, do you mean like technically in regards to like bugs or, tech debt coming through in the game? Or do you mean like in a design sense as the player playing it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the design. I mean, it was. They were talking about Armok.
Yeah, no. Sorry, this is Dragslay. C Dragslay.
Oh, C Dragslay.
Okay. That's a little earlier. Yeah. No, that was definitely. C Dragslay died because I was writing it originally when we had to structure things differently because of how much memory we had available and stuff like that, and that led to certain decisions that we couldn't then carry forward. And also, I just didn't know how to do modular stuff as well.
Yeah. And so then you were saying then that informed your design philosophy for Armok?
Armok, yeah. And it was a bad decision, actually. The decision was we need to build from the ground up. Yeah. And we need to plan it first, which is, these are good things in a sense, planning first. You like to plan first. But we wanted to plan out this whole complex situation from the bottom up meant like tissues, bones, hair on your, really just kind of like you were doing like a race car game with 50 parameters on the tires,
And we even had an editor where you could create these creatures, and we actually had a tiny community, and the community is really what made Dwarf Fortress work. But in the beginning, we had just a tiny, like, I don't know, about 10 people or so, and we let them have this editor, and they created, the more crazy of these guys created. Like one created the bovine, which is like a cow.
Yeah, he was Italian. He was Italian, and he was like, in English, you just don't have a word for a cow, right? There's bulls and cows, but what is the like non-gender? Just what is the animal? And so he's like, it is called the bovine or whatever. And so there's this cow, and that was. I mean, we didn't really have any animals in the game except rabbits, so we were happy to have that there. But we were also like experimenting with materials and effects and stuff. So I remember there was this demon that we made that looked like a big head with spider legs coming out of it.
Yeah.
But we had the eyeball tissue was made out of a different material that was affected by sunlight, so it would catch on fire. And so whenever you saw them in the daytime, they'd be walking around and their eyes would just light up and burn. And it just all this stuff. Like
just all these chemical reactions and these really specific like body parts and stuff like that. So, but how do you make a game out of this?
Because we're like, let's throw in a magic system, and you could like teleport people's skin off their body next to them and stuff, and they're like rip their noses off. Yeah, it would update the models and stuff. It's all really cool.
Right. But, it's like what is a game if it's just about body part damage and that's it?
Yeah,
that's what it ends up being.
It reminds me more of these kind of things you might see in your Steam Discovery queue, where it's just like, hey, take these stick figures and throw them in this saw or whatever. Right? It's just kind of, which is a whole genre now, I guess, which is, it's fine. But it sounds like
it sounds like the kind of game to get you on some kind of FBI list as well. It's like it's a body part destruction simulator. And
we're like a little old for that. I mean, if we were 10 years younger, I think we would have been on all the lists probably.
So we're talking obviously about Drag Slay and Slaves to Armok. Like, how long are we talking about you two spending on these games? Like, how long on Drag Slay until then you put it on the shelf, and then Slaves to Armok?
Yeah, 93 to 2000 for Drag Slay. I'd say 2000 to 2004 for Armok, and of course that runs right into the story of Dwarf Fortress, because Armok was going along just fine. Yeah. And Dwarf Fortress came along and just sort of cannibalized it and sucked it away.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole time, to just an example of how much time we spend making computer games, the whole time that we had been making Drag Slay and Armok and Dwarf Fortress, we had about 5 other projects going on at the same time. We even had one that was called Space Junk that had that was like the old game Space War, but it was with modular spaceships. I mean, there's some games out there
Forever
now.
Thing where you could
exactly
build out your ship.
It was on quads with textures,
right? And this is like years and years before this kind of revolution that's going on Steam now with these kind of spaceships.
Yeah, these voxel ships. Yeah,
and this never saw the light of day.
Never saw the light of day.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So, did any of those other games see the light of day?
Yes, but only later. So when we got the web page up, none of the old games made it in.
Yep.
But we started writing a bunch of crap. While we were doing Armok, we put up like World War I Medic, Liberal Crime Squad are the 2 games that people might have heard of or a few people played. And then there were like 15 others that were all worse, all stupider.
Down in the basement.
And none of it, except for World War I Medic and Liberal Crime Squad, reflect our old output.
Yeah, right.
There was so much cool stuff back in the past there.
But Dwarf Fortress took all the creative.
Yeah. So before we get on to Dwarf Fortress, I'm really interested to know, because you're making all these games, and obviously it sounds like you two are the kind of guys that can go deep on something, can just catch your interest and go deep on, the ability to teleport someone's skin off or something like that. Or, in Tarn, when we met in 2016, I remember you were deep in the middle of coding instruments for Dwarf Fortress. So when you have this style of working, I would say, like, how do you actually reach a point and where you get that realization, and what's the process of taking something like, say, Drag Slay you work on for 7 years? what's the process of going, okay, this is done, we're going to put this on the shelf, it's enough of that, we've reached the end of this sort of this development conclusion, right? Is it just because, Zach, I think as you're maybe hinting at, other games take your attention away and it's a natural sort of parting with each game? Or how do you go through that process of putting one down?
We run them into the ground until they're dead.
That's like, that horse, just like keep hitting it
until the design, right? Until the design just has some block or.
I remember with like the third iteration of that space junk game, we had one, and we had this thing called the error that we did not understand at all, because it was one of our. The error, and it was like you play the game for about a half hour, and then all the input stops working, and we had no idea why. It's just totally inexperienced, and kind of like alluding to one of the things you asked before. We're all just self-taught, like computer science education that mattered. Like I did 3 classes in college, but I knew everything in them. It was just kind of pointless. And at University of Washington at the time, you couldn't go into a computer degree unless that was like your thing, like because of like the Microsoft connection, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't do a computer degree. But the error was, it turned out it was because I
years later.
Yeah, I learned this later.
I was going to ask whether it haunts you still today.
Yeah, so figured it out that we were using a joystick. So there's joystick support on this game where you can rotate this ship, and we weren't clearing the message pump properly. So it would fill up over time with joystick input that wasn't being cleared properly, and then the thing would just die, but only a half hour in. And so there's no way for me to figure that out without understanding Windows architecture better. So we were so angry about that, because it was a really fun game.
Because that's like a forced exit, basically. Like to use this, stay on the space theme, someone just hit the airlock and you guys got sucked out of that project, basically. Like it's against your will.
Yeah, okay. It happened all the time.
So let's do it. Let's dive into Dwarf Fortress. When did the first sort of inkling of this game, this idea, this concept come in during Slaves? Was it before Slaves to Armok's development, or was it during it, like something started pulling you in a particular direction, some little brainworm, I imagine?
It was one of these projects we were working on simultaneously.
Right.
It was during Slaves to Armok.
Yeah, October 2002.
Right, and it was also just Tarn started this idea, and then it was like when it became time that it looked like something that might actually work for a game, for a bigger game, then he called me, and then we were like, okay, we can get this to work. But you should describe.
A lot of these side projects are games that are too stupid for Zach to be involved with.
Right.
There's a proving grounds, and you need to come back with the hunt. Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. Like I actually had my own games I was writing at the same time, and they met a similar fate. But it's like, you should describe what was Dwarf Fortress like before it was Dwarf Fortress.
Yeah, because so in October 2002, which is kind of like right in the dead center of all of these kind of text game side projects, I was like, I want a game where I can mine, right? I was like Dig Dug and Boulder Dash type things, and there's an old one called Spelunker, not Spelunky, but the main one I was thinking of was like VGA Miner, or Miner VGA, depending on if you look at the title screen or the exe file or whatever, and you literally just go down an elevator and mine, get minerals, and bring them back. And so we're like, okay, we're going to set up a mining game, because it's really fun, because you carve out the space and you're kind of exploring in this space, bringing things back. I mean, now there's so many of these games like Terraria and stuff like that. It was basically like a Terraria type game, where you'd go out, except it was turn-based at first. And you're like, it's called Mutant Miner. You're a miner and you get a pickaxe or whatever, or a shovel, and you mine down, and you do find minerals and bring them back to get some money. But you also find like these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle mutagen canisters, right? To get, and you bring back to the mutator, and you start growing arms and other things that are going to help you mine better. And you can also make like a cloning vat and make a new miner. And now you've got 2 miners that you're controlling. And this is where when I was just like spitballing this all in one day, this is where the original design kind of started falling apart, because it's just like those old like SSI games where you're controlling your party and then 40 orcs get to move. And it's just like everyone gets to move. And so you're sitting here controlling these miners, and there's also like some hostile slime type creatures down underground. And it was just like way too much.
And I guess at that point,
camera movement and stuff.
It had that puzzle element of like, as you move, everyone else moves and things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It was
gotcha.
kind of, so it was
Okay,
kind of like
right.
a strategy, like
Yeah.
tactical RPG type thing, and so it just really, but the map was bigger than one screen, so the camera would also like give you whiplash while I was shooting between the different people and stuff.
Of
Just terrible.
course.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
we took all of that, and this is, and then we were like, okay, this is when, but I knew there was something there, so. This is around the time I called up Zach, and
Yep.
basically the conversation began like, we need to make this into a real time game. It needs to be a game where you're more abstractly controlling these people. You're not just
Yeah.
moving them, and you're like clicking on their goals and stuff like that. And then we're like, and this whole mutant thing, it's just stupid. So let's think of something, that's going to be more resonant, and immediately just jump on dwarves, right? Because
Yeah.
we're all big Tolkien fans over here and crap like that.
Mhm.
So we just talked about that for like, it was like 2 days, just like talk for like 8 hours on the phone and then call again.
Yeah.
And
So you two weren't, you're living separately?
yeah, this was down when I was in grad school. So I was down in California for grad school, and Zach was up in Washington working, and so we're separated by a couple states, but we were basically calling each other every day to talk about video games anyway.
Yeah. So
And so this,
let's pause on this for a second, because this is an interesting sort of element of like how you're even collaborating together, right? Like, how were you? What was your kind of version control? How were you actually working together? Excuse me, working together logistically.
yeah, so I'm the programmer on the projects generally.
Yep.
Like Zach had some side ones he was working on, but for the ones that were released on the website, so we didn't technically need version control between us. It was
Yep.
just design talk, though. There was a
Yep,
lot of
yep.
design talk, and we just kind of wrote things down on tablets. There was not a kind of internet sharing at
Yeah.
all. Maybe emails. We occasionally email
Yeah.
stuff back and forth, like
Yeah.
email a document, email it
Yep.
back, and that kind of thing. And that was for at least 7 years, starting in 2000.
Yeah, wow. And so how old are you guys at this time? Like, what are you? You said you're in grad school. So for those of us outside of the States.
Oh yeah. This would have been for me. Math is weird too, because like generally, if you're going to get a PhD, you just skip the master's degree in the U.S.
Yeah,
But
right,
all of the people coming from outside all had master's degrees coming in.
right. Okay,
So we're all different ages and stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I must have been 22, 23 at this time.
Yeah, okay. So you're in your mid-20s as well then, Zach, when you're
Yeah, it's like 20,
kicking this
25,
off.
26, something
Cool.
like that.
And you guys, what this is the thing that eludes me as well. What were you doing for work? How were you actually paying the bills? What were you doing? Was it at this point, was your website actually supporting you in some way, shape, or form, or?
No.
No, the PayPal button came in 2006. So
Yeah.
6 years, 6 years with nothing. But those 6 years happened to line up with when I was in grad school.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Right.
the nice thing about mathematics is that they need people to teach basically every undergrad coming in, or most of them, teach a couple math classes. And so grad students in mathematics get paid just enough to live.
Yeah.
But,
just like a little stipend to,
yeah, but it's not like you have to go find support for yourself. That it's just enough.
Yeah. Okay. And what were you up to at the time, Zach?
Oh, I was just working whatever stupid job I could find. I was like
just
working
at
at I worked at a gas station. I worked at the naval shipyard loading aircraft carriers with food.
Yeah,
just
cool.
stuff like that.
Anything that permitted you to like focus your time on games. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Hell yeah. All right. So let's go back now. So you you get this call, Zach. You have these 2 long 8-hour calls, and then what's the next step from there?
Yeah, so the result from those 8-hour calls was like, we're going to make a game called Dwarf Fortress. It's going to be about a group of dwarves, not a group of mutated miners, a group of dwarves. Yeah.
Yeah. So once again, it was like Tolkien, right? You just dig, and then die. It was like, that was the
Balrog is there somewhere. Yeah.
Right. Well, we don't talk about that because the Tolkien estate.
Yeah. No mithril, no Balrog, no Hobbit.
That's not in this game. Yeah.
No. But the cool thing about it was, because we've been into these roguelike games for so long, actually, it was right at this point in the phone call where we're like, and then there's going to be an adventure mode. Like, this is going to be a game.
Really? That early on?
That early,
wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So you make this fortress, And then there's like your different craft workshops and mining tunnels, just the natural layout, like Dungeon Keeper or whatever, just this kind of simple
that
layout
you've created yourself.
That you've created yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're going to go in there with a character and explore it. So you know where everything is, except it's going to generate additional information like little diaries and stuff like that for you to find. And you're here to rob as many treasures as you can. And so your original fortress creates your maximum high score. Your adventurer realizes up to that maximum high score if they don't get killed, if they can get out with some treasure. And it's basically, in a sense, an arcade game almost because of that system.
So it's turn-based, so it's more like NetHack or something.
Yeah, it really is a roguelike game where you don't have a procedural map.
Yeah.
And 2 month scope. 2 month scope, October to December.
2 month scope. What are we at? Year 23? I used to tell the anecdote of like when we started Armello, we were like, let's just do a card game, 6 weeks, because we'd shipped a bunch of games together at a couple of studios, and we we're like, 6 weeks. And then it took us, what did it take us? 2011 to 2015. It took us like 4.5 years. And I tell that story as like, but you have just, that your joke is better. The punchline gets a little harder.
Well, especially because it's October to December. It's one of those things where like, we'll be done by Christmas, just like World War II or whatever,
just like the dwarves thought starting their little mine, right? In and out, going home for Christmas.
Yeah, no, we dug too greedily and too deep, and now we're paying for it.
So then what's so you start and you say 2 months. When does it start to sort of dawn on you that there's more there? Like, because obviously I imagine as you're approaching that 2 months, it's becoming very clear that this isn't a little thing. Did the game just grab you like others? You know how a project like grabs you and it takes you. Did this one grab you like nothing else? Was there, did the possibilities just sort of unfurl themselves in front of you? What happened?
I think we started to notice the things that, the rest of the industry noticed about Dwarf Fortress is like, this stuff is really working. Like being able to dig out a room and then designate it as a bedroom and then create a workshop and craft different things. It's like we could see that this was going to be big and definitely bigger than Slaves to Armok.
In 2002, help me with my video game history here. Like around this time, were there any real like colony sims out there as opposed to like I think there were really early like Dungeon
maybe Tropico or those Caesar type games and stuff. Like we never even played Dungeon Keeper 2, but we played Dungeon Keeper, those Cleopatra type games, and there were a bunch of cool strategy games, of course, out then, and even things like The Sims maybe were out right then.
Sims was out in 2001.
So there's all of that kind of thing, and dwarves had like very Simsy elements immediately because you have these little people running around under their own power. And more so than like a Cleopatra Walker, which just kind of goes.
Because the Sims you can make your own. You make your own house. It's funny too because when I first during the Steam revolution happened when we were making I had my wife try to play Dwarf Fortress and she was a big Sims player, so she made a bunch of above ground houses like the Sims, and I was like, no, you gotta dig down or you're not doing this right.
That's amazing. How did that go? Was it the right decision safety wise or like of just building above ground? How did if you're not digging down to the dangers down below?
Right. Well, people don't know that you have to dig to build. It's easier to build, and also you need the underground crops.
Yes, right.
And stuff like that.
Flooding.
And then she just flooded herself. Which happens to everyone.
So, talking about people playing this game now, so you two are making it. When was the first time that someone external to Bay 12 or say your partners like actually got their hands on this game? So you've spoken obviously a huge part of Dwarf Fortress's success and the fact that you two have been able to keep developing it for so long is thanks to your community. Was the community formed to some degree before Dwarf Fortress? Did you have a little band of your own dwarves following you along on this little adventure?
Yeah, it was the Slaves to Armok.
Yeah, the Armok people. And
really?
Armok was going. Yeah, Armok went until 2004, right? There's this process we were just kind of alluding to here, where from 2002 we get Dwarf Fortress starting at the end, and we notice immediately that it's gonna be a more interesting game, faster to work on because we're doing text graphics. It's in the same genre, roughly. It's like a fantasy sort of role-playing game because of adventure mode, as all of our previous ones, Armok, Dragslay, all that.
Yeah.
And so Armok just didn't have a chance. But we had, by then, maybe 50, 60 people following Armok. And so we had, as Dwarf Fortress is just sucking all of these features out of Armok, so easy to put in. And we're still like promising, and did for 2 years, these kind of Armok releases and stuff. But eventually in 2004, we just kind of said, okay, we're going to just set Armok down. We told people in the community, we're going to set Armok down, work on Dwarf Fortress seriously for as long as it takes to get a release up. But to bring them along for the ride, knowing that like Slaves to Armok was even Sea Dragslay was a fantasy world generator. They had map generation. Dwarf Fortress didn't have that originally. We have this map generation and all these things happening. Like Sea Dragslay had these ogres and things and dragons that would attack cities when you weren't there. Just this whole active world. And we kind of didn't get to that part in Armok because we started from the bottom up or whatever. But this was the promise for people. And a lot of people were looking forward to that because of the promise of games like all the Ultimas and where kind of Elder Scrolls looked like it was going at the time. Yeah. Like with Daggerfall being so much more procedural than the subsequent ones, that everyone was kind of looking at this, all these 50 people, when I say everyone, and saying like, okay, this is another promising candidate for a game that I'm interested in, right?
Yeah, there was some overlap there in the interests,
And then we tell them that it's going to stop, right? And we're working on Dwarf Fortress, which is just kind of this thing they don't really know much about. But to carry them along and to tell them we are going in the same direction, that is why Dwarf Fortress for 17 years was called Slaves to Armok, God of Blood, Chapter 2, Dwarf Fortress.
has a particular ring to it, don't you think?
Yeah, it's got 2 colons, so it must be good.
Yeah, twice as good as a game with 1 colon, that's for sure.
The only thing we were missing is one of those like apostrophes in a random word, right?
Yeah, true. But that's then the Tolkien estate might get a little bit too interested as well. So probably a good decision. Yeah. So okay, now an interesting sort of element that I'm seeing come through here as well when you talk about this, when you talk about the community, you talk about the website, the PayPal button, trying to find your own little success in hopefully getting to print out some discs and put them in your own Grammy bags and send them out, is that I'm sure a lot of people perceive Dwarf Fortress and Bay 12 and the two of you as sort of maybe this idealistic, like non-sellout version of developers that are just, slave away on this one game for 23 years and they're just so committed and they're sort of anti-capitalist or something. But it actually sounds like that you did have some sort of commercial sensibilities from the start, that you were looking to commercialize this in some way, shape, or form. Am I correct? Am I correct there? Like, were you thinking at this point in time, like, were you just kind of tinkering and happy for people to play it, or would every now and then would you think, because you're even talking about, there's some overlap here, we're not going to lose our community, or?
I mean, keeping them was important, not for monetary reasons, right?
Because they weren't monetized at that point.
Yeah, it wasn't monetized at all. It wasn't how we were thinking about it. But it's cool to have people play your game. Like these games don't work without players in a sense that's stronger than, like, of course the game needs a player, but we need the stories to be written and shared, right? It's a community. It's a community experience. And we needed to have those people around. They were giving us great input too, you know, but we didn't have any, like, from the beginning through high school, college, all this stuff. I think we were alluding to this before. It was kind of one of these questions we only half answered before, is like, we did not have any sense that there was a career possible in video game development at all.
Right. It was in fact, it was like we were less interested in making money the more money we made, really. Like when we were able to quit our jobs and survive solely on Dwarf Fortress, those were the happy times. We didn't have to worry about money, really, and we also didn't have to worry about the business side of it. And it wasn't until much later, when the bills started getting worse and worse, that we had to start thinking about Steam and all that.
Yeah, well, then the pressure, your hobby became commercialized, right? And then the pressure, they say the fastest way to suck the joy out of your hobby is to commercialize it, right?
Yeah, and if we had healthcare, free healthcare and UBI in this country, like the Steam thing wouldn't have happened. We
Yeah,
would have just
yeah,
been doing
interesting.
dwarfs, just content with
Ongoing.
our
Yeah,
content with how things were going. But that was not the situation in the
yeah,
United States. We had the health problems, and yeah, just
yeah.
not enough
Amazing.
money.
So it's kind of interesting. Do you think that your how would I put it? Like your lack of interest in that commercialization, let's say, came from trying things earlier and it's sort of not happening and just being like, because I remember when first got into games, I didn't even know that you could make them. Like my approach to games was the complete opposite of yours. I played mainly console games as a kid, and our computers at home were like work computers that my parents had, and they were scared. The classic thing that viruses come from games. So I think there were like 4 or 5 PC games that I ever played in my life at home because I had to launch a 6 month long campaign to like convince my parents that the work computers and their business as a result would be safe if I played a video game on them. So for me, video games were kind of like a magical thing that came off a conveyor belt. And so I actually had zero aspirations to become a game developer because I saw no possibility of becoming one. I didn't understand in it. Do you think it was kind of the same in regards to commercialization for you too? Because you'd had a little shot earlier on and then thought, oh, this is just too much of a long shot. And you just were so content just making the games and having people play them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, hardly even a long shot. It still didn't seem like a possibility.
Yeah.
Like they seemed like a separate track, right?
It's
It was like
ASCII. How could
yeah,
it
yeah,
possibly? How could it possibly sell anywhere? Right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
It's not. I get it. You're not even on the. It's not like just further down the path, or you got to try harder. You're just doing a
Yeah.
completely different
And
thing.
there was this idea, like when we talked about briefly near the end of high school, this idea that maybe a shareware thing could happen is
Yeah,
the only kind of aspiration at all that we had about doing this. And when we heard from literally zero people,
yeah.
like no one, then we're like, well, okay, that just doesn't work. And it actually
Right.
fits
Yeah.
in with our other experience of this earlier on, where we had like Commander Keen as kids, and we sent some money, I think, to Texas or wherever to get like an official whatever copy of it or whatever, and we didn't hear back. And so we're like, this shareware thing is just a dead zone. It's just nothing is there.
Yeah. It not only does it not give, it also takes. So yeah,
Yeah.
some Texas fat cats like sitting there with your cash. I mean, well, I love that, and I love the notion of having this community there, because especially working in simulation games, it's almost like this sort of thing. Like if you code a tree to fall in the forest, does it actually happen if it's not rendered on anyone's screen? Like it's and when was the so let's jump ahead a little bit to when was the first release to your community? How long were you working on the game? Were you at that time a pretty I think it's become more of a trend that people develop games and they just get them out pretty early access or even open development. Were you getting really early versions of the game out? Or even back then, were you like version sort of 1.0 for the community is like 6 months of development or something?
It was 4 years. I mean, 2002, and we put it out in August 2006. We
Oh,
wanted
really? Wow. Okay.
and no even playtesters behind the scenes. Maybe there was a few people, but not
Yeah.
really. And we put out one. We went to like Usenet and put out one thing in 2004, like halfway in, where we had our dragon, like our D, come in, but then shoot this giant real time, colorful in 16 colors, but colorful kind of blocks that faded out. That was just like
Yeah.
unlike anything you'd see in any roguelike game or anything. It was just way
Amazing.
more impressive looking. And we're just like, hey, this is coming sometime. And
Yeah.
then 2 years later, because we felt like it needed to cross a threshold where it would appeal to those roguelike people.
Yeah.
Like it needed to appeal to some group of people to prove that we kind of turned a corner.
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for Tarn, but for me, I remember one of the Usenet things was we wanted to be one of the roguelike, one of the 5 top
the big 5 rec dot roguelikes where there's like NetHack, ADOM, Lorne for some reason, Moria. I mean, Lorne's great, but people don't hear of it, and then you're like wondering, is that one of the big? We wanted
to be in that list.
Yeah, just Dwarf Fortress, and
it never happened. But
well, look where are they now? Look at you, top of Steam. So you release. So you're working on it for 4 years. Before we get to release, how did you form that vision of you've sort of given us one bit of inspiration that, you just had, Zach, like thinking of an end goal. But how do you approach a game like Dwarf Fortress, which, like we said, is now 23 years in development and ongoing? What does a 1.0 even look like in your heads as you're sort of moving towards it? You knew that you had adventure mode, you have this simulation. What was the sort of the original scope of V1.0 that you wanted to release to your community and the world?
Well, the very original scope was that, let's see, I think your adventurer would do this, and it had something to do with Indiana Jones.
Yeah, we had a whole weird scope with like archaeology and Nazis and like 10 different ages that went forward and stuff like that. That we were originally pointing toward this very different weird game about how adventure mode goes forward in time. And that, it was just the strangest thing. And there was like even the evil archaeologist. Because I mean, the first movie has an evil archaeologist,
Belloc,
yeah. Which is just like, you got to have that then, right?
And
it was just this whole strange thing that we were kind of aiming toward, and we were aiming toward that for like a few years after release, even as kind of a secret kind of thing. But the funny thing was, in 2006 when we released it, we had never told anybody about adventure mode. It was a surprise on the release.
Oh, wow.
That it even existed. And they just knew this fort mode game was coming, like this weird, like, when we told the community, hey, we're working on this successor to our game, but it's like our RPG, but it's also a game where you control a colony of dwarves. You just got to trust us. Yeah. and it's like, and it just ended up having the secret RPG in it. But it was like the time of the release, because the original release was, I remember it was 0.23 or something like that. Like we knew it wasn't 1.0, and we were very clear about that. We had this list of features that constituted 1.0 that we still use today. Like the Steam version 0.5 is halfway through that list. It's basically the same list.
Amazing.
And it was just checking off different things that we thought we would. It's funny because the list had like tutorials, graphics, and all that kind of stuff. And that constituted like 1%. That was worth like 0.01.
Yes.
And so we just ticked up the Steam number just a teeny bit. We went from like 0.47 to 0.50 with the Steam release after 3 years, which is, does that mean we're going to take another 50 years to finish? Well, it's trouble.
So you release it to these, at that point, was it still around 50 people when in what would it have been, 2006?
200 people, I think.
All right, so it had grown over time.
Really large, 200.
Released an effect, bringing people in,
Yeah.
Soon, like at some point there, something awful was created, and we got.
They didn't pick us up until after the release, though.
Right? Yeah.
So it was like the 200. It's funny. I think it was like, we may even know the number. It was something like 213 when we checked it. It's like, because that number went up after the release. But like 4 months before, there's just complete random luck here. 4 months before, in April, which is my birthday month, in 2006, one of these 200 people was like, hey, because we were showing screenshots and stuff, right? Maybe even a few more little videos. And they were like, hey, we really, dig what you're doing here. I'd like to send you $75 for your birthday. And so we're like, how does that even work? Right? We don't know. And but someone's like, no, you can just set up a PayPal tip jar. And so
it was literally one of your community members that alerted you to the fact that this could be a way to commercialize
this would even work, and that it wasn't even thinking about it commercializing. It was to get $75, and so
it was just to get your birthday present. Thank you. That's what we all set it up.
And so we're like, when we set it up, we're like, well, how do we show it to this person? Well, you got to put it on your page, and so we just left it there, just threw it up on the page. And then when we released it, like that month, we made $800.
Nice, which is $800 more than your original shareware attempt. So
yeah. That's like $875 if you count the old one, the $75. So it was kind of like, it was weird. I mean, this all kind of fits into this story of like, at like 2 months before that, I quit my math job because I was like, I didn't know that, like, we didn't even think that Dwarf Fortress was going to work. We thought it was going to be popular, but we didn't think it was going to make money to live on. But at that point, I didn't care. We're just going to kind of see what happens for a couple of years because I had some savings from the math job. And Zach was still working. And so we're just like, okay, we'll just see what happens.
Yeah. And by now you're in your mid-20s, I imagine, as well at some
Yeah.
time. So, yeah, perfect time to just throw caution to the wind and give it a
Yeah,
shot.
28 years old, unmarried. I didn't have any dependents or
carefree.
anything.
Yeah.
Just like,
well, the only dependents were, 40 dwarves or something like that, or 7 to begin with. And however many.
And they're all going to die anyway. We're not going to send them to college, just like Zach's dog. He doesn't go to college. Don't have to worry about it.
Not a long-term investment. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you make $800. Now, again, we're talking about 23 years worth of development here, and 19 of them are post-release of 0.023 or whatever it is. When was was it an immediate sort of brush fire with the community? Were they immediately engaged with it? What was the initial response from the community? Obviously we've heard you made $800, but their reception, and when you it's the first time, like you said, you had people actually playing the game.
They absolutely loved it. I mean, that was the reception.
Top marks, yeah.
And they would go immediately. I felt bad about this. They went to a bunch of other forums and were just like, I remember this one guy was just like, hear ye, here's the game, Dwarf Fortress. And I'm like, we hated it when people did that on our forum, right? It's like spamming, right? It's like, yeah. We ended up making a special area for people, able to do that. But it was just, especially because we felt guilty about having done it to so many other people. But it's still that's why it got to those students in the UK that wrote a really funny story before Something Awful, and then
it's just when those websites like Something Awful started taking off. I mean, it was because of I think it was a story of the elephants catching on fire and storming through and destroying the fortress. It's just, or the carp eating the dwarves. giant goldfish eating dwarves. That just took off on Something Awful, and then that was the big one. I think that was one. Yeah.
Zach, if you could just explain for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, what is Something Awful, and what is this kind of inflection point that you're talking about for the game?
So I wouldn't know how to describe Something Awful is like a message board. I think it's kind of like
old school forums type.
Yeah, a forum, and it has an interesting subscription structure where you have to pay $10.
Right, it's like a humor thing.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, and we don't actually know all that much about it. We were not members.
I think it wasn't our mother.
Yeah, our mom. Yeah, they said it. They offered to let us be members so that we could read our own threads about the game, and we gave it to our mom because she wanted to read the threads.
So she became an expert at it. We didn't really.
The first community manager for Bay 12 was your mom.
Yeah. we called her the samurai. She was out there judging people and telling us, that this is proper behavior or whatever, and this is, and she would always have clear decisions, and she did moderate the forum basically for a while. It was pretty bad.
I love it. Keep it in the family. So this is a really, really interesting part of Dwarf Fortress's development. There's so many obviously interesting parts over the the 23 years that you've been working on this game, and beforehand the titles that came before it, but the community and other things. But one of them is just the word of mouth, these emergent stories. And I mean, you obviously you create the simulation, you put it out there into the world, and I'm sure that the both of you, we just had a build review of our game Jump Light Odyssey that we're working on, which is, like a space colony sim on a ship, like Star Blazers inspired. And in the build review, a bunch of stuff happened that, we've got the system set up there, but you don't ever think about those outcomes, 10 actions down the chain of cause and effect of your systems. So this, tell me about how you both felt and I'm kind of interested in two regards. One, as designers and creators, did it just kind of blow your minds what people were actually experiencing in this simulation, or did it track with your expectations? And then the other part is, how did it feel just watching these stories appear, and did it bring a bunch of folks to the game from that as well?
It definitely is. Yeah, it's the primary way that news is spread about the game is the crazy stories that have occurred. Yeah. And it's just because it's so complicated. It's like we were saying earlier, it's there's so much going on that you can't see. right now there's a giant weather simulator going on, and you can't even look at the sky in this game.
Yeah.
There's no way to see it, but there's like
but it's happening.
It's happening. There's like
It's
weather
kind of
fronts and cumulus clouds and all that stuff, and it's like there's rain shadows that cause the deserts to appear, and it's invisible.
But it was just it was amazing to see. We did not expect what happened. Like we knew, like we had seen like forums like for these roguelike games, right, where people would go on like rec.roguelikes or whatever and put their like Yazid or YASD stories there, yet another stupid death stories, and they'd share them. People really enjoy that, but I had never seen, it was probably happened quite a bit, but I had never seen a YASD story like in some other forum somewhere that was just kind of, and then spreading, virally around the internet, right? Even though they're really funny, because the game is very kind of like if you understand in NetHack that you can like dip a sword into a fountain to make an Excalibur or something. It's a very like esoteric type of story.
Yes.
Especially because there's a lot of numbers too, about like I have a +7 this and stuff like that, right? So and that's we don't have numbers in Dwarf Fortress for that reason.
No, it's similar to the body part damage. It's like we want to simulate everything.
Yeah. Instead of someone saying I was low on hit points, they can say I had a broken ankle, and people understand that. That's going to resonate with more people. And so we knew what made good stories, and we knew that our game was generating good stories as we were working on it, but we didn't know that was going to have this powerful effect on the internet because we didn't understand the internet at all.
Yes,
like back at that time, we understand it a little bit better now.
Yeah.
But in 2006, we still had no real understanding of what the internet was like.
And it's just forming too at this point. Anyway.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you're kind of building it, I guess, as well. Like in some way. So, did this, in a design sense, did this kind of seeing these stories, did it pour fuel on your fire? Obviously, you're doing these kind of the whole point of this game is to create these simulations, right? That has these effects. But do you remember that there are like particular kinds of stories that you heard where you were like, oh, well, if we do this in the game, then more of that could occur, or was it just the more that you just stayed on track anyway, the more crazy shit ended up happening anyway?
Yeah, I don't. The stories just happened. I don't think we.
They're inspirational in a way. I mean, it's not like very rarely kind of like this, especially when they're like building computers and stuff like that. It's like we just like sit back and like, okay, we'll just be in awe of people. It's fine to just be in awe of people.
Yeah,
but it does let you know kind of what things. But you do get a feel over time when you're making a thing like this, like what kind of mechanics are going to resonate. And obviously seeing it happen is giving you feedback all the time. And so I'm sure we're processing that even subconsciously or whatever, just processing what kind of feedback, what kind of mechanics lead to better stories. And then we end up putting more of those in the game.
Yeah. And it's just the norm now in video games, right? We have live service games and early access and open development. And I mean, we have a community manager and a community content manager and a publishing producer, right? And these roles literally didn't exist in the industry when this was happening for you both. They were sort of just coming online, 5 years after or something. Was there any kind of interaction with your community? Do you remember requests that came out with that first one? Were they like, because now when you release a game, it's like, oh, everyone wants you to be able to change the FOV, or everyone wants to be able to, equip more weapons. I'm just making stuff up here. But do you remember any strong sort of responses for the community in regards to like taking the game in a particular direction, even if it's like small features or things they wanted to do that maybe weren't on your original roadmap?
Well, we have we had this website we were running, and we have this entire section just for suggestions, and that was huge. We don't even read that as much as we should. I mean, it's just
there's so much there. It's so big. And these threads, like someone will sit there and be like, you need to put die in the game, but then there'll be like a 50-page thread about the history of die in the world and so forth, right? And so what we end up doing,
the sophistications of our fans.
So we end up with like a system of like, okay, I'm going to bookmark this thread and put it in the crafts section of my notes and stuff, so like I can refer back to community knowledge on things, because they do find all kinds of cool stuff. And so it's just from the beginning, probably before the release. I don't remember quite, because Armok had a suggestion thing too, I think.
Okay,
it's
so
kind of
a bit of that already,
And the forum has grown over time. Like we used to have a section, like we had 7 sections in our forum just for different topics about the games. And then we had one section at the end called various nonsense. Now, you'd know now, never in a
like
million years, don't
Yeah.
make that. But we had to go through the process because this was before like 4chan existed.
Yeah,
And
that's it. It's like the 4chan thread on your.
And basically, various nonsense died when 4chan came into being. It just got way too screwed up.
Right, because
yeah,
images were allowed back then.
Yeah,
so we had to
okay,
ban
so you're
images.
like,
and they started sharing all kinds of like literature and so forth. But I mean, it was funny though because they had this one thread down there, and they were allowed to move their own threads because there were so few of them that they would they just kept it. They just cleaned up their mistakes basically. Cool. But someone went into the various nonsense section and made like the various nonsense moving battle fortress thread and would kind of move it throughout the forum, and people would add to it. It kind of reminds me now of when like Twitch people raid each other with
and so forth. Totally.
And so people have been doing that from the beginning. Like once they have the tools to do that stuff, they'll just start inventing things like that. But eventually, we had to break it up into 5 sections, and they all have purposes. These sections.
The fun police came eventually. Okay, so sticking still with the original release, and because it's such a fascinating time as a salient point in this game's development. Those original stories that started to come to you through various methods, whether it be from your mum or the internet or whatever, was there one in particular for either of you that stood out that really blew your mind, of like things that happened in your game or anything?
I mean, it's definitely boat murdered at first, right?
Oh, probably arch crystals, but this is like
crystals later on. If you're talking about the release, you're talking about 2007.
I'm talking about the release. I'm just talking about like when you first put it out there.
Yeah, the first one was boat murdered, as the Something Awful one on 2007, where they invented this thing called succession games, where you could pass your saves. So you'd play a save for a year, or whatever. But in this one, they played it for a year. They write kind of from the perspective of a fortress manager. What happened that year? Diary of what happened that year. And the game was producing some messed up stuff, like these elephants that were on fire, and think a butterfly dropped in a doorway and it means it couldn't close anymore or whatever. Just all kinds of problems that happened. And they also incorporated adventure mode stuff into there, like going and visiting the old fortress afterward. There was this emperor that was on fire, burning, walking through the hallways and stuff. And they went through I don't know if it was 14 or 18 parts or something, just years and years trading this save around. And some of the writers were just really good.
Yeah, right.
I remember you get to chapter 3 or 4, and then you're just laughing your ass off or whatever. And that one got sent around everywhere. So that was the first one, but then there was so many other ones like the.
Hold on a second, Tarn. What did you call that first one? Did you say boat murder?
Boat murdered, yes.
Boat murdered. What is boat murdered referring to? It sounds like a particular event in that story.
It's the name of the fortress, actually.
Right. Like the game will give you a dwarf name for your fortress.
Yeah,
but the dwarven language has English translations to it, so that's
okay. Right there.
Tarn wrote a bunch of, or he took a class in linguistics.
Several linguistics classes. As I was trying to figure out I should double major, and I'm like, and I never settled on anything. I did so many different weird, because I was always a mathematician at college, but then I worked in a genetics lab, grinding wasps with this drill and then pouring them. I think when I was trying to do animal behavior stuff. And then I moved on to chemistry, and that just didn't stick at all. And then I moved on to linguistics. I don't remember what else. They tried to get me into economic geography. There's a lot of stuff, and I never settled on anything. So I just had a math degree at the end.
Yeah, so you created a game where you never have to settle on anything. I love it.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. You never get bored. I mean, you're working on a game for 20 years and literally never bored with it, because if you do get tired of what you're working on, there's 50 other things you can work on.
Right. These the side projects we were talking about a while ago. It's all of the energy from these side projects that we were created now are all going back into Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress got so huge that it can actually accommodate all these things.
Yeah, it's the project of side projects. It's literally just, funnily enough, yesterday my partner was saying to me, we were in the car, and she was like, why do we have to be, why does everyone have to be good at one thing? Why can't we just do a bunch of different things? I was like, I'm not arguing with you. I'm on your side here. That's such a good call.